This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Claire Kimball.
And I'm Jodie Spears.
There's been a bit of talk about tariffs this week, so we'll
Just
we'll get you across that and also what it means, more importantly. We're also covering off floods in outback Queensland.
Neither you nor I were across Studio Ghibli, Claire. Ghibli? I think we've settled on Ghibli.
We have.
But it was bubbling away online, so we'll get you up to speed on that.
The Sussexes are in the news for a variety of reasons, but we're starting with something sweet. Let's get into it. The something sweet we have in mind is chocolate, but Jodie, it's also very sweet that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you, Claire. Long-time listener, first-time co-host, obviously. Hopefully I can keep this seat warm for Kate while she's off having her beautiful third baby.
I'll toot your horn. I don't expect you to run through your list of accomplishments. Your Insta bio says that you're a mum of 3, wife to 1, journo and lawyer in training. We first came across each other when you were a political reporter for Channel 7 in the press gallery in Canberra. You then went on the crime round in Sydney and a very long stint on the 7 Early News. You were the anchor of that, and that's where my love for you really deepened.
It's a very intimate connection, I think, that early morning one. I think knowing when you're up in the dark that other people are up with you watching your news. You used to write to me sometimes, which was lovely, saying, I'm watching. And it was such a great job for having 3 young kids. I could get up just in time for them to wake up, which sounds crazy, but It really worked for a while. You can't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning forever though, unfortunately.
No, or fortunately, maybe. And look, my early mornings at home, as you say, I felt that real connection with you. You did that until mid last year. You were on air though for how many years was it?
It must have been almost 10.
Yeah, wow.
With a couple of maternity leaves thrown in the middle.
And on air at 5 a.m, I just had to drag myself from bed to my desk. You, though, had to actually get from home to a studio, made up, across the news. And
pronouncing things correctly.
Pronouncing things by 5 a.m. So, yes, I think on behalf of all Squizzes, you were a very important part of our news gathering to get the Squiz Today out. So, yes, on behalf of Squizzes, thank you for the work that you did. You're a very important part of it. And you're here now, which is awesome.
It is awesome. Let's get into it. Kicking off with chocolate, a couple of shocking things came to light this week, Claire. First is there are 1 kilogram Lindt bunnies being sold for $120 in Melbourne. That really put a spotlight on the price of chocolate as we head towards Easter. And secondly, I would listen to the Squiz Today the other day and you're not a fan of Lindt chocolate.
Look, I don't like to make it all about me. Occasionally I do, but yes, I did confess that it's not my favourite. But look, if you invite me over for dinner and you happen to crack out a bar of Lindt chocolate after dinner with a cup of tea or, you know, a bowl of Lindt balls, I'm definitely going to partake.
You won't turn them down.
I'm not so pure, but Cadbury Dairy Milk for me every day of the week.
I actually agree with you on that. We're pretty basic gals
on a Unity ticket for that one.
But look, the point is if you're out and about and you're shopping for treats for Easter Sunday, then we will be paying about a third more than we did last year thanks to the price of cocoa going through the roof.
Yeah, Cosy lives, but also very particular issues with cocoa from the countries and areas that grow it. So droughts there mean that it's a scarce resource, so prices are up. Be alert. Probably a bit alarmed as you go shopping for your Easter treats. It's a good posture, I reckon, to take as we cover off tariffs as well, being alert and alarmed. Without doubt, United States President Donald Trump's announcement this week of tariffs being placed on all imports into America was the biggest story of the week.
It sure was, and not just here but right around the world. In my former job, I would have been using all the news catchphrases here, Claire. Trump's announcement sent shockwaves around the globe.
Yeah, it's definitely big, this move. Look, we'll get into the expected impact of these tariffs in a bit, including for Australia. But let's just start with what are the details of what he announced? it comes down to a formula.
Yeah, it's quite mathematical, actually. If you saw a picture of Trump making this announcement with an oversized prop, it was a table outlining this. So to start with, there's a baseline tariff of 10% that will be levied on all imports from all countries. And then countries with trade deficits with the US were hit with much higher numbers. So to explain that, if the US imports more from a nation than it exports to them, then the tariff the US is imposing on those imports is higher.
Yeah, so as for Australia, we import more from the United States than we export, so we're stuck on that 10% baseline level. But to this formula, Trump sees a trade deficit as a sign of unfair trade practices. So there's this sort of punitive part to it. And then the formula kicks in. So we'll put a link into the episode notes so you can see the formula. To me, it looks like a spell from Harry Potter or hieroglyphics. It's very mathematical.
Definitely one for the maths fans. Luckily, I don't mind a bit of maths myself.
Oh.
But essentially, you take the trade deficit, you divide that by the total goods imports from that country, and then divide that number by 2.
You're definitely going to have to give me an example.
Okay, so let's look at China. The US buys more goods from China than it sells to China. There is a trade deficit to the US of $295 billion. The total amount of goods it buys from China is $440 billion. So 295 into 440 gets you to 67%, and you divide that by 2 and then you round up. So the tariff imposed on China is 34%. It's quite straightforward, really, Claire.
Very straightforward. And look, China is actually a really interesting case because it's the world's next biggest economy outside of the United States. So that 34% tariff is in addition to a 20% tariff that has already been levied on Chinese products coming into the United States.
That is a lot. So long story short, to use some news jargon again, economists around the world are baffled by this.
Yeah, completely baffled. There was a wave of commentary that came after that announcement on Thursday, our time, that the calculation is deeply flawed economically, that it will fail in delivering Trump's aim of having no trade deficits with any nation. But the aim, of course, is what he calls Liberation Day, that the United States will no longer have any reliance on imported products.
Yeah, he says it's one of the most important days in US history because he reckons the tariffs will boost US manufacturing and that will make America wealthy again. It's quite a long-term play, though, because in the short term, American consumers will essentially pay the tariff or the tax through price rises. So for America, there are fears of inflation and recession.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we've talked about a little bit in this tariff conversation. That's how it actually works. It's not the countries or the importers that are being levied that tax. It's actually American consumers, which seems a little bit counterintuitive, but the idea is it sort of serves as a bit of a signal in market to not buy the imported product and that American products will take its place. So look, in normal times, that would be enough of a concern about the US economy, that there's inflation risks and risk of a recession from this. But of course, this is not just about America. The impacts from what Trump has announced potentially have global trade and global economy ramifications.
I reckon we need a squeeze shortcut on that, Claire, because at the big picture level, there's quite a bit to understand. And it's not just confined to the economic effects either. There's talk about the effects this has sort of strategically and in a defence area as well.
Yeah.
It's clearly going to be the issue that is talked about for weeks and months, maybe years to come. But let's bring it home now. As we said, Australia has copped a 10% tariff. That was the lowest rate going.
The lowest rate going. Some of our territories have had bigger taxes, like Norfolk Island, which is a bit confusing because they say they don't really export anything to the United States, but Norfolk Island, I think, has a 34% tariff put on it. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. We'll pick that up in Squiz Shortcuts. What has been excluded, though, from Australia's exports to the United States are pharmaceuticals, also some critical minerals. And our Treasury officials reckon that when it comes to the direct consequences, we're going to be okay because our export volumes to the United States are about $25 billion, which isn't huge in the grand scheme of things. The most exposed industry that we have, though, is our beef industry.
Yeah, we sent $4.4 billion in beef to the US last year. That's out of almost $15 billion in beef exports globally. Aussie beef actually got a shout out from President Trump during his announcement because we don't allow American beef to come into Australia. That's over biosecurity concerns.
Yeah, so the issue there is that American beef has issues with diseases that we don't have in our herds here. So, look, it's not to say that it's not a big deal for farmers when you look at the scale of it. I was reading one report in the Sydney Morning Herald that said that Australian beef is used to make 6 billion hamburger patties across the United States, which seems like a lot of hamburgers.
Huge.
But the general take from the industry here is that our government should do whatever it takes to keep American beef out of Australia because of those disease concerns.
And that's what Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton have said this week. There will be no change to Australia's approach. Dutton said he was willing to have a fight with Trump in Australia's national interest. Those were his words. Albanese took a slightly different tack.
A more diplomatic one, I think. Actually, he had a 5-point plan about what was happening, and it included things that we wouldn't have any tit-for-tat tariffs against the United States. He says retaliation isn't something that he wants to do, that's no good for anyone. He also pointed to the work that the Albanese government has done during its term to establish better relationships with China, particularly getting rid of those trade blocks that we had at the end of the Morrison era in 2022. A lot of work going into re-establishing trade with China again.
There's a lot of reporting at the global level about a reorganisation of the whole global economy and China potentially being a big winner out of this. The Financial Times editorial said what Trump has done is an astonishing act of self-harm because the US could be cut out of global trade.
Yeah, that's how big this is, this sort of sense across the reporting, particularly in those business newspapers, that this is just so huge. So they're making very big statements about it. The idea is that pretty much every other nation except the United States will just reorganise itself and cut the US out. I just feel like we've only touched the sides of this one because it is quite a big one and we're going to be talking about it, as you said, for weeks and weeks to come. But hopefully that's just given you enough of a jumping off point. 3 other stories from the week to get you across. First, I reckon Queensland floods. Let's go north of where we are here in Sydney. We had squizzes from that region actually email in this week to get in touch to say they were a bit baffled, to use that word again, why this wasn't getting a lot more attention in the national media because of the scale of the disaster that's unfolded there.
Yeah, this is across outback Queensland, which you'd usually think of as being a bone dry place, but it's been an inland sea this week. As you say, I saw a friend of mine from Queensland posting on social media quite early on in this pictures of the floods saying if this was in Byron Bay, then it would be getting a lot more attention. I guess it is a more sparsely populated area, but it's a huge area and it's flooding on a scale that many people there say that they've never seen before. We're talking here about mostly southwestern Queensland, areas around Charleville, Longreach, Thargomindah. It's an area twice the size of Victoria, just huge. NASA released some images yesterday actually to show the scale, so we'll drop those into the episode notes.
Yeah, when you put it in that kind of proportion of area, Victoria, I think, is quite a large area, so twice the size. It is quite remarkable. In some places, they've had about 18 months worth of rain in just 4 days. So the floods have been really big. One of the other issues that surfaced this week was around the lack of warning that locals had.
Yeah, the Bureau of Meteorology says that it did warn of heavy falls, thunderstorms, possible flooding, but it can't be very specific with its data in that enormous region because there are no weather radars for hundreds of kilometres. I think it's something that in the city we take for granted. You know, I often bring up the rain radar and check for kids' sport training and whatever, see what's coming in. But the BOM says that the radar isn't the only thing that they rely on for forecasting. They have all sorts of different tools, but obviously radar is an important one.
Yeah, and that saw the intersection with the election campaign this week. So Peter Dutton flew in and announced $10 million for funding of weather radars in that area, it was pretty quickly matched by the Albanese government.
As for the flooding itself, there will be major implications. Obviously, a huge amount of property damage. You've got homes inundated, vehicles, sheds, thousands of kilometres of fencing. But the loss of livestock is in the potentially hundreds of thousands. And that's what really hit me, I think, when I heard the reports on the floods this week. It was really devastating. So there's all the trauma for farmers that comes with that as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we rarely linger on as a result of disasters like this, that psychological trauma, particularly for farmers when it comes to dealing with livestock and having to manage those very, very tragic outcomes. Also an effect, I guess, to think about, to come back to the national level, when it comes to supermarket shelves, whether you're going to the butcher to get your meat prices are likely to spike because of this, because it is such a big area and a lot of Australia's beef does come from there. All that water also has to go somewhere. So communities in northern New South Wales are really on alert.
Yeah, some of those areas already sodden after the rainfall from Tropical Cyclone Alfred.
Yeah, they really seem to cop it at the moment. And I reckon let's leave that there. We'll move on to the Sussexes. We haven't spoken about the Sussexes for a while. They're always in the news, but they were definitely in the headlines this week. And that's because sales went live for Megan's As Ever range. She's launched a line of jams, teas and honeys.
Yeah, we're told that the product sold out within an hour of going on sale on Wednesday US time. I'm always a little bit sceptical, Claire, when I hear about the sellout. I mean, how many products did they have ready to sell? Was it maybe a marketing strategy to make a slightly smaller batch so that it definitely sells out and it sort of increases the hype for the future releases? Maybe I'm just getting too cynical.
Oh, look, I think what we've done is swapped out one cynic in Kate Watson for another Jodie Spears.
Perfect. Megan does,
balance is restored, yeah.
Exactly. Megan does have, I think it's about 2.6 million followers on Instagram though, so
wow.
She does have quite the potential customer base.
Yeah, and from what I can see too, it's something that we touched on yesterday as we were discussing it. That whole venture is backed by Netflix as well.
It is, yeah.
So it's not just that TV show element. They're actually a partner in this commercial retail venture as well.
Yeah, an investor in As Ever. Yeah,
just extraordinary. Also, no doubt supercharging their PR around all of this. So what Megan did this week was invite a journalist from the New York Times into the family home in Montecito in California. It's the first time that a reporter has actually gone to their home, been allowed into their sort of private sanctum. The condition, though, was that the New York Times would not take any photos.
Probably quite a clever platform, I think, to cooperate with the New York Times. Their cooking section is so popular. I have lots of foodie friends who often send recipe links to the New York Times, but you've got to subscribe to get into them. Megan provided a couple of recipes to them to go with the profile piece, and those ones are not paywalled, so you can access them if you'd like.
Yep, that's another link for the episode notes, I reckon.
I had a bit of a laugh, Claire, when I was perusing the range on the Netflix website. The raspberry jam was described as the heart of the collection. It's a luscious fruit-forward spread, according to the website. And I thought, I'm not sure an Aussie audience would go for that. It'd have to be described a bit differently. Yeah. What does fruit-forward mean?
It's a good question. I'd probably need to taste it.
And what kind of jam is not fruit-forward?
Well, that's very true. That is a very good point. But look, all of this is really part of Megan's transformation. I liked how the New York Times put it. From broken royal bride to triumphant domestic goddess. That's how they're pitching it. So
quite the transformation.
It really, broken royal bride. It's really dramatic, isn't it? She says that she needs to work and she loves to work. So this is just part of making the Sussex family work while she raises 2 kids.
Which is not an easy combination, so respect to her for coming up with a way to make it happen. It wasn't the greatest week for the Sussexes. Prince Harry left his post with his beloved charity, Centre Ballet. It's a youth-focused AIDS charity which he co-founded in Africa, and it seemed to follow quite a lot of trouble within that charity.
Yeah, I remember when he and Meghan stepped away from the royal family, Centre Ballet and maintaining that connection there was one of the things that got a really big shout out at that time. Remember, he lost all sorts of military commissions that he was very involved in. He made a big deal about maintaining the connection with the Centre Ballet organisation that he had, as you say, a part of setting up back in the day. So, yeah, to break with them now, clearly this very bitter feud with the woman who chairs the charity. She's accused him of harassment and bullying. It played out in quite a extraordinary and public way, no doubt very bruising for Prince Harry.
Very much so. Claire, let's move on. We mentioned at the top that neither of us are Studio Ghibli experts by any means, but we nominated you to look into it. So off you go.
Off I go. Okay, very happy to do that. We first came across this when we dived into the Google Trends data, which we do every week, because sometimes there are things that aren't in our regular sort of news scoping when you're looking across the newspapers and websites and TV news and all of that. This is definitely in that category. It was very, very high on the list of things that Australians were searching for on Google, but it wasn't all that prominent in the news. And when we talked to Andrew, of course, our Squiz Today host, and our editor, Ryan, about it, they were like, yeah, this is a really huge story.
They were all over it and they were adamant, weren't they? So this was in the news this week because of a new feature that was released on ChatGPT and not in collaboration with the studio.
Yeah, that's the news bit. That's why it was actually in the news this week, and certainly something that Australians were looking into. So people were trying this new feature and they were flooding the results on social media, uploading the images that they were actually generating out of ChatGPT in the style of Studio Ghibli. Studio Ghibli is an animation studio that's based in Tokyo. The brains behind it is Hayao Miyazaki, is his name. Sorry if I've butchered that and you're a Japanese animation fan, you're like, oh God, that's dreadful. But look, he's a bit of a legend when it comes to the genre. 4 of the studio's films are among the top 10 highest grossing Japanese feature films. Spirited Away is one of them. More recently, though, is The Boy and the Heron. It won last year's Golden Globe, BAFTA and Oscar for Best Animated Film. Those 2 films you can get on Netflix if you want to have a look at them.
So Studio Ghibli is a big deal and much loved, which is why people went nuts when they were able to generate their own images in their style using ChatGPT.
There were record numbers of users and logins to ChatGPT once that was released, to the point where its servers almost went down. It recorded this week the same sort of surge that ChatGPT saw when they first launched 2 years ago.
Wow.
That's how big it was.
But the issues aren't just about its usage, right?
No, there's a couple of things. So one is the potential copyright violations. You're a law student, Jodie. I think you will probably know more about that point than I do.
Not this area yet. Copyright law isn't necessarily a career that I'm thinking of pursuing, Claire, but some experts say this is uncertain terrain because while Studio Ghibli's style is very distinctive, it's hard to stop others from replicating work in its style. Copyright is about specific expressions. So, for example, a specific image rather than a more general artistic style.
Got you. That makes sense. The other issue to clock is this sort of general discussion around artistic integrity. So Studio Ghibli films can take years and years to make, and they're hand-drawn. Its fans really celebrate all the work that goes into it. There's a real appreciation for how hard it is to do that. But with ChatGPT, I saw one example where this very intricate 4-second clip that took artists at the studio 15 months to make it took ChatGPT just moments.
Wow. And what does this mean for the world of art and AI more generally?
Yeah, exactly.
Miyazaki has previously called AI an insult to life itself, so it's pretty clear where he stands on it. And you can understand when you've spent that much time painstakingly mastering your craft and then a program comes along that can just sort of rip that off and
do it in a heartbeat. Yeah, exactly right. Jodie, before we get into election campaign stuff, there's a few things coming up this weekend. The Super Netball season kicks off today.
Yep, and the first game is a big one, a rematch of last year's final. It's the Melbourne Vixens taking on the Adelaide Thunderbirds. Starts at 4:30pm Adelaide time, and you can stream that on KO.
If Kate hasn't had her baby yet, I reckon she might tune into that. Also, daylight saving ends on Sunday for those living in the states who celebrate that. New South Wales, South Australia, the ACT, Tassie, Victoria.
Which, if you're confused, means the clock goes back an hour so you can enjoy the extra sleep. We will be celebrating. And a heads up that school holidays kick off this week as well for students in Queensland, Victoria and the Northern Territory.
Which, as we discussed, seems pretty early, but Easter's not that far away.
I wish that they would just make the school holidays uniform across the country. I find it really confusing when different states do different things.
That is, of course, our cooperative federation. So here we go. And just quickly, Andrew and I mentioned this last week, but the deadline for ByteDance to sell TikTok in order to avoid a US ban is this weekend. We're recording this on Friday. That's not squared away as we speak.
There are rumours that Amazon has put in an 11th hour bid. A couple of other potential buyers floating around too. So we might be covering it in next week's episode. Claire, we might not. Depends how things shake out.
You never know. We'll wait and see.
Election time?
Yeah, I reckon let's do that. So on Tuesday, it's the First Leaders debate between Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. That's at 7:30pm. It's on Sky News if you want to tune into that. They will be answering questions from 100 undecided voters in Western Sydney. It's that People's Forum. It's a format that's about 15 years old now. We were on the same election campaign in 2010 that had the first one.
Can you believe that's 15 years ago?
When you're having fun. There's 14 seats in Western Sydney. It's one of those regions that certainly the pundits are saying it's one of those areas that could decide the election.
Absolutely, which is something to note. Labor holds 10 of those 14 seats currently, but their primary vote has been falling there for a number of years.
Yeah, as it has in other areas, just for the major parties more broadly, but it's definitely one to watch. For that area, like so many of those sort of outer city areas, there's 4 words: cost of living crisis.
Cost of living crisis. That's a good segue to talk about what happened on the campaign trail this week. We don't want to give you a blow-by-blow because I think a lot of people are tuning out to the day-to-day happenings. But Claire, if someone hadn't looked at any piece of the trail coverage this week, then what would you say is the one thing they should know?
The one thing that caught my eye is that the commentators say that the coalition's had a pretty slow start and that Labor is campaigning quite well. That's backed up by Peter Dutton's position in the polls slipping a bit. So it's something to keep an eye on. There's actually opinion piece after opinion piece written this week by critics of Dutton as well as supporters saying, come on guys, like what's going on? So that's something to watch. It's been a bit of a weird week though because of course with all that news coming from the United States and Trump, Prime Minister Albanese has had lots of opportunities to look very prime ministerial.
Yeah, and Peter Dutton's probably been more of an opposition leader, I think, in response to some of those things, isn't it? It's sort of probably easier to say from opposition that you're going to pick a fight with Donald Trump and you need to be a bit more diplomatic as the PM. So
it puts you in your box, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Those issues, yeah.
There are 4 weeks to go, so lots to play out.
Yeah.
And I feel like these election campaigns have phases where someone has a good week and someone has a bad one, and then things flip around a lot. So we'll see what happens. As for what else is coming up, the Greens leader Adam Bandt will be speaking at the National Press Club on Wednesday, and on Friday, Coachella weekend kicks off.
Yeah, so that's the annual Music and Arts Festival in California. In our meeting when we work out what's in the podcast, I asked who was headlining and I was told that you would have a list, Jodie.
Here we go, Claire.
Yeah.
I've been researching. Lady Gaga, Green Day, Post Malone, Travis Scott, they are the official headliners of Coachella. But there are so many artists. You realise when you look at this how huge this festival is. Missy Elliott, Charlie XCX, Zed, The Prodigy, the list goes on. And I like seeing a few of the older style bands in there for those of us who remember The Prodigy and Green Day.
I was just thinking of The Prodigy this week for some reason. Anyway, they're at Coachella, so there you go. On to our recommendations. So I've this week binged on Binge the show The Pit. It's an American medical drama. Medical dramas aren't usually my thing at all.
I love medical dramas.
Yeah, right. I reckon you'll really like this.
It's where I start picturing my parallel career as an emergency doctor.
All right. journalist, lawyer, doctor.
A few too many things going on.
Podcaster.
In my head, in my dreams.
Yeah, that's right. But look, it's really compelling. The format is each episode, which is about an hour long, is an hour of the shift. So it has this sort of momentum that goes through it. The star of the show is Noah Weil. He was a really big star in ER with, of course, George Clooney and that whole thing. There's a bit of an interesting sort of background to all of this. There's a lot of people who were involved in ER who were involved in this, and there was a bit of legal contention about that crossover. What all involved say is it's got nothing to do with ER, but it's, love it. It's been great.
All right, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
My recommendation this week is a very practical one. It's an app. Is that allowed? Can
Absolutely.
I recommend an app?
For sure.
It's called Yuka, Y-U-K-A. It's got a little carrot symbol on it when you download. And I find it really handy in the supermarket because you can scan not just foods and drinks, but also like personal care products. So soaps and sun creams and deodorant and all those things. And it gives you a score out of 10 for that product. And it kind of does a lot of the analysis for you. You know, when you're looking at those ingredients lists and you're, especially with things like deodorants, bamboozled by the chemicals.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it analyses those for you and it sort of tells you which additives that it might have that aren't great. And then it also, if it gets a really low score, it gives you a recommendation for something that's better.
Right. Okay.
So, look, take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, I do my own kind of analysis as well, but I just find it a really handy tool. And my kids also like it. They now go around the pantry, like scanning the barcodes. And it's a bit fun.
So look, if you're in the supermarket and you see Jodie looks like you're taking photos
like a weirdo
of every product. She's not. She's sussing it out. They're very helpful. I'll definitely download that and use that. That's a really good one. Thank you. Squiz Press. Big thanks from us if you signed our Newshounds petition. We're past the 10,000 mark.
How good is that?
Extraordinary, just extraordinary. We've set up this petition because, of course, we've been talking to federal politicians for the last 18 months or so about providing us with some financial support so that we can make Newshounds everything that it needs to be. We want to get to every single Australian primary age student to help them suss out mis and disinformation online, become critical consumers of news and information. They haven't really heard us on that, so we're really stepping up our efforts to try and get this the attention that it deserves. 10,000 signatures. It's amazing.
And it's a huge issue. I sent this petition out to some of my networks and I have a lot of friends who are primary school aged kids' mums.
You're in that zone.
Definitely in that zone. And a lot of them said, I've been really worried about this with AI and, less sort of critical thinking perhaps being developed in our children. It's the kind of program that we need to foster that.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And look, if you want to send it out to your friends as well, please do. We're not stopping at 10,000. We would like 20,000 now, according to Bryce Corbett, our Squiz Kids
Forge
director.
on.
So we are forging on. We'll put the link to that in the episode notes as well. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch up again with you next week.
Looking forward to it.